I'm Audra Arnsdorf, your host. We have a great show for you today, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Well, today we have a great treat for you. We're having an interview with Dick Sutphin. Dick, it's great to have you with us today. And what's up for today?
The time of Atlantis going down, we explored that yesterday. The water level, according to the geologists, the water level at that time was well over 300 feet higher than it is right now. 300 feet. And that's going to displace, I don't know. I mean, I can't even imagine how many people would not be here, would not have a place to see. It would be to live. Jacques Cousteau, back a few years ago, you all know him. He was a guy with his little submarine, and he was exploring all over the planet. And he discovered a cave 165 feet below the surface of the sea. And that cave was obviously, it had been stuffed with tons of antiquities. And you can go out and you can Google this and you can find and read about it. But antiquities that were probably part of Atlantis. And it would have been a whole different story as far as what was above the sea and what was below the sea at the time that Jacques Cousteau discovered. And that was 165 feet below the surface of the ocean. Now, I'm real concerned about what 18 feet would do, so I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be part of the shift. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't happen for 50 years, but it's going to happen unless there is a reversal of the global warming. And of course, the book I just read was The Vanishing Face of Gaia. And it's all about global warming to the degree that it's just going to get hotter and hotter and hotter. And of course, that is going to change everything. 1 degree is going to change all the diseases and things along that line. If it goes up several degrees, it will really change the face of the earth. So I'm curious, Anna, are you willing to share? Because, as these people may or may not know, about, 2-3 years ago, I projected you forward. Did you see a lot of the same thing?
Some of it. I was...
Anything about extraterrestrials being involved? Did you? Let's see how many hands. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Not you.
Well, I had Terry Hartman on my radio show last Wednesday, and Terry is a great hypnotist, but he's also, all the UFO organizations use him to investigate cases of abductions and similar things along this line. And he just sees an increase in what's going on in regard to the UFO activity. There's just a lot more and a lot more and a lot more. So that's kind of interesting. And they seem to have stepped in the past when we have been in need. But he always talks about 70 different species have been identified. The government and everybody else, there's 70 species of aliens. I have no idea because, man, that's too much for me.
Stephen Bassett has a whole website. He's been talking about disclosure for, 10 years at least. There was the whole thing in Washington where they tried to force disclosure. They were on TV, it was on CNN. All these people that had been working on secret military projects were coming forward and saying, look, we know that they exist. There are so many species. At the time they said 50 species of aliens that they knew about.
We've had this talk. We've gone over time.
Oh, Dick, that is so interesting. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We're here with Dick today, and he's written so many interesting books. I'm sure you want to explore this all more deeply. Now, I've been interested in reincarnation as a child because when I was in high school, I learned about the nitrogen cycle, and where everything went from one thing to another, and it went in a circle and was cyclical. So I thought, well, life could be cyclical like that also. And there are many native peoples who believe in reincarnation and the spirit world. And so there's a lot to explore in all this. And just read some of his books so you'll have more time at your leisure to delve more deeply into this, because it's a very interesting subject. Well, Dick, I know you've written a lot of books on the subject, so we know what an expert you are.
And I'm going to talk a little about my latest book, which is Soul Agreements. And I wrote it with my wife, Tara. And the premise of the book is that we're going to hypnotize clients that have real problems. And Tara, in the meantime, is sitting right with me, and she is connecting her chakras to my client's chakras. And through this chakra link, she is creating a very high level of psychic attunement. In other words, she's going to know what my client is going to say, probably before the client says it. And so it is a matter of, by combining our techniques, we are really looking at what this person came in to try to accomplish in this life. In other words, what were their soul agreements? So that's the basic premise of the book. And we tell many chapters, many stories, in which we do this joint investigation. Now, as part of the investigation, we did follow-up, we explored all aspects of the person's life. And what we found was, I was looking for destiny. I was looking for, to what degree is destiny a part of your life? In other words, how much of your life was predestined? All right, but now the premise of the book, the real reason that I wrote it, was to investigate predestination. In other words, to what degree is your life predestined? To what degree is my life predestined? And so we decided we needed a lot of different types of cases. And we worked on this for probably the better part of 3 years. And the way we found the answers was through the regression. We found out what the client had experienced in a past life. In other words, what was the life? Where was the problem today relating back to the past life? Now, Tara is doing automatic writing at the same time she's psychically linked to the client. And so we now have the automatic writing, we have the regression, then she would take the information, the astrological information about the client home, and she would do a complete chart on the individual. And this will take her at least 3 hours just to basically get it set up. And she investigates with Western astrology and a Chaldean, a form of Chaldean astrology. And so when we combined all this information, we found that the client was living the life, quite literally, that they had set up to want to experience this time around, because the astrology and the automatic writing and the regression all just fit together like a hand into a glove. So we saw the degree of destiny at play with each case history that we did. And they were different types of case history. The people were coming from a total different place. And yet, people seemed to destine their lives ahead of time. And of course, some of them didn't destine it real tightly, others did. In other words, they're experiencing almost everything the way they set it up. But you can do this, you can do it too. If you have your astrology chart read by someone who's really good, especially somebody who combines Eastern and Western astrology, and you look at your past lives, you can understand what you are doing here, why you're here, and what you have to accomplish while you're here.
It's such a vast and fascinating subject, this work you do in teaching us about things that we had maybe never thought about. Dick, do you have an anecdote that you would like to share with us? Maybe something about your clients that may be interesting or humorous?
Okay, I'm doing hypnotherapy, but I'm using spiritual techniques to find the answers. And so that usually confuses people a little bit. They say, well, what? And so I'm going to tell you just a few stories, a few examples of how in finding the cause of your current problem in the past, you can release the effect, you can let go of it in the present. And as one of my favorite examples, a man who was a workaholic, who was just absolutely working night and day. And if his child was having a birthday, well, he could hardly come home and stay long enough to eat a piece of birthday cake, and he'd have to go right back to the office and work. He's just total workaholic. And it was hurting his marriage. And so he went to a regressive hypnotist, and the hypnotist took him back to the cause. Now, the cause that he foresaw, or she saw in regression, was he was burying his child because the child starved to death. Literally starved to death. And as a parent, can you imagine what a horrible experience that would be? You cannot feed your child and she dies. And so the cause and effect of a situation like this, he never ever wanted to experience that type of pain again. He never wanted to have to go through it. So in his mind, making money equals having food. Because this probably took place at the time of the Irish famine, and the poor people were not eating. The rich people continued to eat. There was not really a famine to begin with. So I would imagine that he never again wanted to experience that kind of pain. And so he was working himself to death to avoid it. All right, now here's another case. This was a case a short time ago in my office. And a woman came to me and she said, boy, my life's not working. She said, I am living below the poverty level, and there's no reason for me to be doing that. I'm well educated, I have a lot of talents, but I am living and I'm just not fulfilling my life. And can you help me with that? And so I began to talk to her about many things. I said, well, what do you enjoy doing? What would you like to be doing for a career? And the woman said, well, I'm really drawn to healing. I am really drawn to healing. I'd love to be a healer, but every time I start to follow that up, boy, I begin to just panic. And I've even signed up, she said, I've even signed up for classes to learn healing. And I panic, and I don't go through with it. And when I asked her about, well, do you have fears in your life? You know, I was just doing a pre-interview to get an understanding of the woman who wanted me to help her change. And she said, well, the only thing I'm really afraid of is crowds. I just, the minute I confront or see a crowd, I get terribly nervous and I want to run away, and I do if I can. I just get out of there. And she told me several other things as well. So now I put her into hypnosis, moved her back to the cause of her current condition. In other words, why is she in this state of confusion? Why is she living below the poverty line? On and on. And when the impression started to come in, she said, I saw myself, or she's describing it actually, she isn't saying I saw myself, she said, I'm seeing myself, and I've got my hands on the back of a young boy, and I have the other hand on his chest, and even though she was deeply hypnotized, she brought her hands up like this. And she realized as she turned around, I asked her to look at the environment, and she turned around, there were pillars all over this huge room that she was in. There was marble on the floor, and there were people who were just winding around this temple-like atmosphere and down the steps, outside the building, and down the street. And she was a healer in India. And she was well known as a healer. And so all day, what her life was about, she'd get up in the morning, she'd go to work, she tried to get to work without anybody seeing her. And now at work, all she does all day long, till late at night, she heals people. And then her major challenge in life was trying to make her way home. Trying to get home without people seeing her on the street and running at her and saying, heal me, please. And so what this basically came down to, this woman wants to keep a very low profile. And the idea of ever seeing a crowd, she is recalling that past life. And she's panicking.
Welcome back. We're here with Dick Sutphin today, and we're talking about reincarnation and hypnosis, and it's really, really interesting. So Dick, what else would you like to share with us right now?
All right. I'm Dick Sutphin, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about my background, how I started. I have a lot of years doing the work that I'm doing. But my background is I'm an advertising designer. And I had other designers working for me. And one of them said, I want to take a self-hypnosis class. And that sounded kind of interesting, but what really intrigued me was the fact that if you took this class with a man named Don Weldon, and this was in Phoenix, Arizona, if you took his class 6 weeks, then he would regress you into a past life at the end of that time. And now that was fascinating to me. And so I did. I took the hypnosis class, and it was a lot of fun, and I learned techniques that I'm still using today. In other words, I learned how to do self-hypnosis. I programmed myself. If I do this and close my eyes, I go down into a deep hypnotic sleep. And so I used it to get over, if I have a headache, if I remember being out on a boat and I was getting seasick, and I used the technique, told myself I was feeling fine, I was feeling just great, came back up, and I was feeling good. But what was important on this class on the regression was I went back to a place called Copan, Honduras, to a Mayan lifetime. And I saw a lot of things during that regression. It was very emotional. And I actually saw my own death in the regression. And I had a lot of, Don had to wake me up several times because I was so upset about the fact that I was stabbed in the back. And I remember getting home and my wife said, really, right there? And she said, well, you have a birthmark a little thin birthmark on your back, right in that spot. And I'd forgotten anything like that. If I ever knew it existed, but I forgot it. But I was so intrigued with the idea of Copan, Honduras, I'd never heard of it, that I went to the Phoenix Library and I investigated. Now, I had seen many things that, well, as an example, I was a young boy and I came running out of the jungle and I saw this big temple-like building, and the sun was setting and it was reflecting on the face of that building. And I assumed, well, the building probably was facing west. And I had a lot of details like that that I could use to seemingly verify. And I went to the library, and this main temple building was indeed facing west. And I went through all the other details, and they were all accurate. And there were a lot of historic details and timing that I was able to verify as well. So now I was really intrigued. And I think probably some of the first investigation that I did was try to prove it all wrong, because this was messing with my belief system, this idea of living past lives, coming back again and again and again, and having the kind of adventures where somebody kills you and you come back and you still have a birthmark, and you find that a lot of what you believe today dates back to that lifetime. So it was a lot to deal with in my mind at that time. And Phoenix was a hotbed of New Age activity. Now, this was in the 70s, and I think there were already 400 New Age churches or organizations in Phoenix. So, but Don was the only, to the best of my knowledge at that time, he was the only past life regressionist. So I took more training, and I began to do it myself. I began to actually work with other people, and at first just one or two, and then I decided, well, I'm going to work with several people at one time. And so I could fit 22 people in my living room in Scottsdale, Arizona. And so I did, and I started doing all these group regressions. Well, nobody had done that before. I was to find out later. When I told Don about it, he said, oh my God, don't do that. You're going to get in terrible trouble. But I explained, I'm doing it, and I'm doing it very successfully, and I haven't had any trouble yet. But it was a marvelous time of investigation, of trying to find out if somebody could speak a foreign language. And then I found people that automatically, they spoke to me, in one case, in Dutch. And I had to say after the fact, why, I need you to speak up in English. And the woman was able to do that. But we took that Dutch, because we'd recorded all the sessions, and took the Dutch that she was speaking to a language professor in Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. And the professor said, well, yeah, it's really Dutch, but where did you ever find someone that could speak? This is an ancient dialect almost. Not ancient, but it was old. It was really an old Dutch dialect. And so they verified another thing. One after another, we were getting these verifications. And I was becoming more and more and more intrigued. And so, although I had the advertising design business, that was how I made my living at the time, there was a spare office built in the office that we had the design studio. In the back, it wasn't being used, and it was big. And so I decided to open a hypnosis center. And I started to hypnotize people that came in. If they wanted a hypnotic regression, I would take them there. And we experienced just one after another adventures, experiments. I was trying to learn everything there was to learn about hypnotherapy, about the potentials. And now this was a very long time ago in the 70s. I'm still doing that. I am still trying to figure out how to do everything, how to do it better, how to do it faster, and I'm experimenting with new ideas. But at the time, I was getting amazing case histories. And so I started, they were all recorded, and so I could go back to those recordings and transcribe them, and I started to have the makings, I realized, of a good book. And that book was published by Simon & Schuster Pocket Books, and it was called You Were Born Again to Be Together. And the book went on to sell 1 million copies, over 1 million copies. So it was a very popular book when it came out, and that was in 1976. And I've written a lot of books since. I continue to write them. I've created about 400 hypnosis CDs that explore every possible aspect of the metaphysical world, but they also help people to lose weight and stop smoking and everything along that line. That's the clinical hypnosis approach. And today I'm a hypnotherapist, and I have an office in Westlake Village, California, and I have a nice clientele, and I do seminars. And the seminars are very much like the one I've done in Pipestem, West Virginia. So if you're listening to this series, if you're seeing the different shows that have been created, why, you've seen some of that as well. So that is my story in a thimble. Very, very capsulized, but that's how I came to be doing what I'm doing today.
Dick, I'm always impressed with your expertise. I'm Audra Arnsdorf with the Healing Platform, and we've been listening to this wonderful seminar with Dick Sutphin. Now, I feel in my life, as we get older, we all have known people who've died, and we're facing death ourselves at some point, and it may cause us some anxiety. So maybe if we explore some of Dick Sutphin's ideas, maybe it will relieve some of that anxiety and give us maybe some hope that there's nothing to fear, because we have this great mystery about death. We have loved ones. Have you ever met someone and thought that you've met them before or known them before, or there's something that you can't quite put your finger on? And maybe this is part of that deja vu where you may have been with them in a reincarnation, maybe in a past life. And this is something to explore, and it gives you a lot to think about. We at the Healing Platform love these topics, and we love these subjects, and we are especially glad to have Dick as our guest today. Well, I hope you enjoyed the show today. We had a wonderful time with the show today. We had a wonderful time, especially with Dick Sutphin, and we'll hope we'll see you the next time. Bye!